So let's talk about form. Form's tough because we're dealing with a two-dimensional flat surface if we're painters or draftsmen, drawers, and we're trying to get the idea of, we can't get exactly, but we can get the idea of form, the idea of three dimensions. And those three dimensions do a couple things. One, they give a sense of volume, and so we can render our way into that purely by observation. I just notice that the shadow is way down here, and I notice that it's a little darker at the border. And I notice that the form slowly turns lighter as it gets farther and farther away from that shadow. And we can just observe and spend time looking and choosing and then correcting, refining those choices and get there. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of folks who do that and do it successfully, do it at an amazing level. But when you get in trouble, you're not quite sure why sometimes. It becomes more of a process and not really an idea. And I love ideas because if I have an idea, I can correct that idea. I can stack ideas. And I can play creatively or strategically with ideas. When I teach in the course, in my program with my clients, I will use the idea of filters. And filters are just a really targeted idea. I'm going to draw the whole face just as a series of eggs, positive and negative eggs, and slices of eggs, and so on. And if I can do a good job with those eggs, it'll start to get the idea, and maybe even a very realistic idea of a head, figure, neck, and so on. So ideas are wonderful. So let's talk ideas. I think of form because let's just follow the process of form. Eggs are hard because you have to gradate in every direction. And when you put them together, they can get a little lumpy and not as graceful as we would hope. Sometimes that's appropriate, but oftentimes it's not. If I use a tube, though, I can get the length of most of the body parts, say an upper arm or a thigh. I can quickly get the depth of it, knowing that the end, maybe the knee end of the thigh, is farther from me than the hip end of it, the start of it. Whereas with a egg, it's a little harder because it's curving in every direction. It's harder to plot the fact that this is farther away from this and that, for example. And then I can just keep refining that idea until I'm comfortable. And I like to keep drawing it again and again and again, not refine one drawing, but keep working with the drawing. Well, it should be a little shorter. It should be a little wider at the thigh and skinnier at the knee. Maybe it should be more curved at the top of the thigh and straighter at the back of the thigh. And so on, refine it. But notice the process I took to draw that tube. Let's just draw a regular old tube. We'll give it a little bit of a curve because if we curve our forms in the long axis, they seem more alive. So I'm going to curve this tube this way. But notice what I did. I drew one line, drew it several times to try and get it right, but I drew one line, and then I went over and I drew the other line. And by spending a little bit of time with both sides, and not just here and here, I really got a chance to compare them and place them the way I wanted to. I realized this was too thin, and this was too curved maybe, and this is much better Maybe I like this one better. Better idea. But notice how I drew one side and then I drew the other side. I drew the length to the best of my ability at this early stage, and then I drew the width. And then, of course, all I need to get to go from two-dimensional to three-dimensional is the depth. And then I drew the fact that the bottom right is closer to me than the top left. And now I've got all three ideas with a beginning and ending, so 4 sides. And now I've got that 3 dimensions, length, width, and depth. So notice I'm drawing one-dimensionally, two-dimensionally, three-dimensionally naturally. And I could stop at the two-dimensional and not give any depth clues. Or I could decide to keep going and give plenty of depth clues. And then I could render on top of that, and we'll do some of that. So I want to get both sides and the ends, at least one end, because we may have to render that into another, but I like to do those construction lines. And you can do them, I do them dark, just so people can see them when we demonstrate. But if I were to do a lay-in, knowing I'm going to render on top of this, I might draw it very, very light. I might even draw it really light and then dust it back, ghost it back, so you barely saw it, and then I could come in with my dark rendered details, and nobody would ever know that I had a construction under there. But in any case, I'm drawing the length, the width, and the depth. And that's usually, doesn't have to be, but that's usually the process we use. The length, the width, and the depth. And in this case, I went that way rather than going to the outside in. Doesn't matter the order. But by the end of it, I've got all the three-dimensional ideas. I like to think of three-dimensional as in a different way as well. Not just the length and the width and the depth, but the lean and the facing and the tilting. Guess we should say leaning here. Tilting. And by tilting, I mean going into the picture plane. The bottom is closer to me. The top is going into the picture plane, farther from me. So if I can get a object on the page and you feel how it's leaning, how it's facing, and how it's tilting. So leaning, facing, and tilting, you're going to feel all three dimensions as all three positions. So as I draw that length, I'm thinking of the leaning. And as I draw the width, I'm still not there yet. It's still just the leaning. And then I need to do something to show these guys. Well, if it's a tube, I got the facing, the tilting, check. I haven't gotten the facing. So we could do a center line, or we could do landmarks, say the nipples and the belly button to show the facing, or we could make it a box. And so look what happens. If I draw a perfect sphere and do an amazing job, and I'm not going to do an amazing job here, But if I do an amazing job of rendering this, you still have no idea whether it's leaning, how it's leaning, facing, or tilting. Even though it has a ton of form, has a ton of mass, it's rendered three-dimensionally, but we're not sure of its real positions in space until we put it on a tabletop that we are on top of. We're looking down on that table. Let's do it this way. We're slightly to the left of the table. And the table's leaning off axis a little bit. We won't know that the ball is doing the same thing as it sits on the table, right? So a ball has plenty of mass, plenty of structure. You can render it three-dimensionally, but I like to separate the idea of three-dimensional form, which is what we have here, from structure. I like to be very clear on my ideas because they help me be a better artist. They help me make sense of things that may be a little overwhelming. Structure is what I call, and structure is a common word, but I define it very specifically, of the form and the position of the form, which encourages me not to use a lot of balls, a lot of spheres. What it encourages me to do is to at least, as I did with that early kind of cartoon head, at least do an egg shape, because now we know at least that that egg is leaning. And if we did a center line, added more information like a table underneath or construction lines on top, we would know that it's facing almost perfectly in a front position. Front facing position is just facing a little bit to the right. A little more on the left, a little less to the right. It's turning towards the right. We don't yet know how it's tilting in and out of space. But the sphere gave us none of the dimensions because it didn't have any direction, was the same as every other because it was perfect in theory, perfectly spherical. But this had a long and short axis. It had an interior corner that told us that it was leaning. It had one corner. And if we were to turn that egg into a tube, now we know how it's leaning. And we'll take this construction line off so we don't show that facing dimension. But now we know with the tube that it's leaning one corner again. They're both leaning similar way. But we know that we are slightly underneath this tube because we have a second corner, long and short axis. Long and short axis wherever it's facing. Long and short axis wherever it's facing, and the corner from the front sides to the bottom. Two corners. And then you're probably ahead of me now. If I were to lean and, let's say here, face, and be underneath a box, the box shows all three dimensions. It shows the long to short axis, length to the width. It shows the depth. We're underneath it, and it shows that it's facing strongly to the right. Three corners, three positions, the three dimensions, the perspective is always using at least 3 points. Perspective, where you're at, and then where the structure is to your eye line. That's where you're at. You're at that eye line, and then that structure has its 2 points, one vanishing, one vanishing. It might have more, but it's got at least those. So 3 dimensions, 3 positions, position, perspective. I try and demystify these things so it's easier for me. And so I'm just going to realize that if I want more structure, if I want more 3-dimensional form in position and in relationship to the whole world, the environment maybe, if I'm that ambitious, then I just need more corners. That's all I need. So with that information in mind, at the very simplest level, it gets me awful far. I just define structure as corners. I want to find more corners. If my drawing or painting looks flat, more corners, the front from the side, the front from the bottom, the top in relationship to the side, long to short axis, corner, corner, corners. The more corners you get, the more structure you'll get. We won't get into it today, but with gesture is the watery energy, water of life, energy of life. Life is both. It's dynamic electromagnetic energy, all sorts of energies. And it's also water in design. We're made of mainly water. So the more watery, wave-like fluid we get with whatever structures we draw, the more gestural, the more alive our drawings look. They don't look like these stiff Frankenstein mannequins. So I'm going to just make sure I get more curves in my drawing, and specifically the long axis curves, because that's connecting one structure to the next, end to end to end. The more long axis curves we get, might be round across because it's a rounded form, but we're talking about the length. The more curved it is in length, the more watery, wave-like it is, the more alive it is, the more graceful it is. More curves. And again, long axis curves. The more life we bring into our drawing, the more grace. More corners, the more solidity, provenance, weight, grounding, structure, positioning we get. Curves and corners. We can break all of the science of drawing with all the pretensions and difficulties down to curves and corners. So with that in mind, we won't worry about curves here. Today we'll just talk about corners. And then we'll just play a little bit with rounding the corners if we have time. And that's pretty easy. It takes a little bit of fluency with your tools, but the idea is really easy. It's just soft edges. It's just little or big gradations. So let's get to it since we don't have a lot of time left. And let me take a look. Looks like we're still streaming beautifully. I'm going to look at the chat real quick before I go on. Everybody doing well? Francesco, hey buddy. Francesco is a dear, dear friend of mine. Good to see you on. Cool. It looks like we're doing well. I think we're doing well. Okay. I'm always a little hesitant on our streaming. All right. So with corners in mind, we want a lot of corners. We're going to tell a story. We're going to tell the story of form. And the story, we don't have to have time to get into all of it, but the story of form is using the rule of 3. It's a big rule. It's how we live our life, actually. It's how all spiritual traditions are made. It's all how all stories are made. It's in fairy tales. 3, the porridge is too hot, porridge is too cold, porridge is just right. There's 3 wise men who go on, do this. 3, 3, 3. Usually there's 3 brothers or 3 sisters, and usually the youngest one is the one that's right. One's too tough, one's too soft, the other's just right. In fact, the cantata used 3 sisters, I believe. to balance. And it could be more than 3, but 3 is the best. 3 gives us a beginning, a middle, and an end. Tells a story, doesn't it? 3 is the number of relationship. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The physical and the metaphysical and the means for them to connect. It's usually a prophet or a mystic or a psychopomp or something like that. Life and death and the transition over. The veil in mysticism. We're on this side, whatever's after this is on the other side. The veil's between. We have to pierce through. We have to have the power to move through that middle to get to the other side. Without 3, we don't have a relationship. The love, there's me, there's my wife, and there's our relationship is the third thing. We have to give to each other for that third thing called relationship. Again, it could be more in these things. I don't think you want more wives or more husbands, but usually you could add more to it, and we'll see how this plays in form. It also creates a pattern. There's no pattern until you have at least 3. If it just happens twice, you don't know if that's a pattern. It might do something very different. But if we did 3, now we have the pattern. We know what's happening, and we can guess the future probably. It's going to end up here. So 3 is big. In any kind of teaching, any kind of convention of learning, any type of story form, any type of connection. I'm politically right, you're politically left. Notice I'm a white man, you're a black woman, or whatever. Notice I'm fluid, you're binary. Whatever it is, that it's usually in society talked in opposition. I'm right wing, you're left wing. I'm right, you must be wrong. I know I'm a good person, you must be a bad person. It creates this incredible opposition and tension and fear comes out through anger. And we can see in social media and political converse, oftentimes great anger comes up because they're trying so hard to be right, they're assuming they're wrong. They're on their side of the aisle. They've drawn a line in the sand. That's a separate mentality. A story is a connective structure. We start here and we end up so much better as we move through that middle over here. Most of us don't know how to get into the middle, let alone get through the middle. We get lost and we get afraid and we stay back. Don't come near me, you guys on the other side. I don't even want to talk to you. I don't even want to hear your facts because I don't believe they're facts. All that's very damaging. It's a survival mentality. You don't go up and talk to the grizzly bear. It's going to eat you. So you stay away, you run away, you get to the other side, you kill it if you can. And our biology wants that. So the rule of 3 is critical because it shows a path through, a connective tissue. And that's what we need in our life. And that's what we need in our art. In fact, that is what art is. That is what craft is. And I think, as most of you know, art is much bigger than just craft. But it's a series of connective strategies, a composition of showing how separate things can come together beautifully, as in a beautiful story, as in a beautiful relationship, as in a beautiful spiritual belief. I'm separate, but someday I will be connected. How does that happen? What's the trend? Is it death? Is it a prophet? Is it a revelation? What is that strategy? Mysticism has wonderful strategies. Art has wonderful strategies. Not much else does. They have strategies like science does. Electricity and matter, energy and matter. We have a strategy to see how those come together. In fact, become the same thing. But it's all up here when we usually live here. So the rule of 3 is a big, big subject. And telling a story with a big beginning and middle end can go far beyond craft. But with the little time we have, as I prattle away here on these things because I love them, we're just going to talk at the craft level, which is plenty. So at the craft level, if I can show you how and this is real simple, watch. if I can show you how the form begins and how the form ends, and notice it wouldn't matter which is the beginning and which is the ending on the form. I said beginning, but I wrote end. I said end, but I wrote beginning. Doesn't matter. And then a great story has a dramatic turn. And usually a great form that really pops off the page, pops off the canvas, has a dramatic turn. And we call that dramatic turn, of course, shadow. And that big turn, that dramatic moment in life, can be any moment in your life. Might have defined you when you're 2 years old. You might wait till you're 89. But notice we have this dramatic middle that may not be perfectly in the middle. And in a story structure, the emotional events, the timeline from beginning to end. This is a story structure. You start out at whatever normal is. Then you usually have an event that shakes you up and forces you to act. It's a call to adventure in a myth. And it might be dramatic. You might have a low afterwards. Oh my God, what was that? I'm going to run away. I don't want to be a hero. I don't want my life to change, whatever. And then it goes up and it comes back down. This is a climax in the story. In an action movie, it's a fight. In a love story, it might be a verbal argument. It might be a push her away or push him away, only to realize you made the worst mistake of your life, and you run to the church. You know, this is a cliche Hollywood movie, and you bang on the doors to get in and stop her from marrying the wrong person. That's a big dramatic climax. The battle, it's called sometimes, and it might be an emotional battle just in yourself with not drinking or deciding to quit your job to be an artist. I'd pick that second one, but you can choose. Dramatic, and then we come back down, but we come back down to a new normal. We come back down to the same world we had, but now we're at a much happier state. Before, we didn't realize we were unfulfilled. Now we're fulfilled. That's the resolution. That's the big ending that completes the arc, completes the cycle. We start out at one state, we go through life. Something big happens at the very key moment, at the dramatic turn, as it's called in writing, and that affects a great change. And now we're through to the other side. We've completed the journey, but we are at a different place, and we've learned something. And that's exactly what happens here. We begin, we have a dramatic turn, and we end. And there might be a subtle drama that starts us off. Starts us off and gets us going. Okay? Beginning, middle, and end. So whenever I'm drawing anything, especially the figure for us, but anything, I want to construct the idea, because that's easier than rendering it. I'm going to make the long axis marks curved. They'll help me with that facing dimension. And they'll give a little bit of life energy, a little watery design. I can design this any way I want, 2-dimensionally or 3-dimensionally. But if I want to get the biggest bang for the buck, if I want a story that's dramatic and attracts attention and makes a powerful statement and makes us feel and see something different by the end of that story. And now this is moving across the form I'm talking about. I'm going to think of the gestures moving down the form to give that beautiful watery design. I'm going to think of the structure, and I can be more sophisticated with this, but this gets me awful far. I'm going to think of the structure as moving over the form. If I can get you from this side to this side and not just move around the form, let's do it this way actually, not just move around the form, that's like a shadow on the wall, but do something to make you feel that you're moving over the form. Now we're feeling the volume, the character, and that third dimension of the form. Whereas before it was just a flat shadow on the wall. So now when I add my shading, I'm just going to move down the form again. But I'm going to do it not down the contour, not down the simple construction lines, the simplified contour. I'm going to move down the shadow shape, the dramatic turn. Now, as soon as I've done that, I'm starting to explain this. Dramatic change. I don't feel the volume yet, but that's okay. But I don't feel that. And I usually, if you look at a sophisticated form like the rib cage, usually it's not going to be a shadow like this, of course. It's going to be a shadow that bumps and wobbles and zigzags maybe all the way down. It's constantly changing as it's running into changes between two big forms or little smaller forms on the landscape. It's bumping. So I'll just do it a bump at a time. So I'm going to find the simplified bump of the rib cage and the simplified bump of the rib cage, a little or a lot different than what I did with my simple construction. Or it could stay just as simple, my choice. And then I'm going to draw the shape of the shadow. Let's get some of this out of here so it's not quite so busy. And then I'm going to give the shadow the dark value it deserves. And if I want to be really clear on how dark, I'll just squint. I'll squint at it, and I'll see, when I squint, does all the shadow shape separate from all the light side shape? If it does, I'm good. And then I'll make the border of the shadow slightly darker, because that'll keep that strong sense of where a shadow begins, and that's going to be where I render out of it. So I'm going to set up my rendering. I'm not going to draw my construction. And then my shadow, hard-edged. It's going to feel graphic like a comic book. It's going to be hard to render out of that. Rendering, we usually think of, rightly so, although it's much more, but rendering is gradation. So if I draw that shadow shape not with a hard edge, but a nice soft edge, let's make that bigger and darker. Now it's going to be easier to render out of that into the halftone, into reflected light, whatever I might want or need it to do for me. Gradation creates that feeling of realism. We got to get the dark shadow and the light light, and then we can gradate out of that as beautifully as we want. We can spend 300 hours, as some people will, to render it perfectly in halftone and reflected light and all the subtle nuances. But we start very simply. So we start with where the form begins, where the form ends, simply or in strong character or exactly, our choice. It might be the exact contour I see. Either way. But I'll take a chunk of it and then I'll give the shadow shape. And if I give a little bit of soft edge, then I'm rounding that corner. And if I give a lot of soft edge, I'm rounding a lot. And then that'll start to refine that dramatic turn. We'll slowly ease into it rather than dropping off the cliff. But the beginning, the end, and the dramatic middle, the climactic change in character that happens in a great story. That's how we get it. And we can do it any place we want, any way we want. So maybe it comes down here. Oops, that doesn't help. What are we doing? I got to get out of here pretty quick. Finish up. But maybe it turns under here. Go ahead and leave that a little oranger just so you can see the difference. And let's say I start with the dramatic turn. And now this little bit is going to have that side oblique. Now I drew the middle first. Now I came to the end, let's say. And there's the beginning. Here's the beginning. I already got the middle. Here's the end. I'm going to think of the end inside the contour. The hips come way out here. Let's do this. The hips are way out here. The final contour is way out here. But I decided that's the beginning. And that's the end. And that's the middle for this lesser form. It sits dramatic turn on this greater form. See how we can get complicated, start adding complexity to it. And we can have the end and the middle and leave off something. I don't know where the beginning of that stomach is. Or maybe it's way up here. Or I can have the beginning and we'll leave that there, I guess. The middle. And lose the end. Maybe like a Rembrandt we don't see. Or maybe like a toneless painter. Like a Steichen or a Dewing. We don't see where it ends. It gets lost. That background gets lost into the environment, like coming out of the mist. So we might lose the end, never find it. We might lose the beginning. We might just have the middle and then it bleeds away. We see the corner of that building as we race with our race car to save the world. And we don't see where it ends. We don't know if we can get around the other side. All we see is where the light meets the shadow. Just that, and everything else is lost. So we can play with this and take out strategically, take out information so it does just exactly what we'd want it to do for whatever reason we might want it to, just because it's beautiful, just because it's interesting, just because it's different. But to get the complete story, if you look at your structure, if you look at your form, and it doesn't feel like form, then we know clearly, and we may not know how to do it clearly yet. It's going to take some practice, right? But we know clearly that I better have a better middle, or a better beginning, or a better end, or a little better on all of those. So that's the basics. And then what I will use, I mentioned this earlier, but I'll say it again, what I'll use to make sure it's working, because it can easily not work. It can be working and it doesn't work. Make sure it's working. I'm going to squint at it. Are all of the shadows separating from all of the lights? Or did I not realize, but a half hour later, I added all this beautiful gradation and all of these deep, subtle details in the light side and all these beautiful nuances in the shadow side, and I lost that beautiful dramatic turn. I can find it still. I can find it, but I don't feel it. It doesn't grab me from 20 feet away. So I'll squint at it. I'll walk away from my painting. I'll get back from the reference and I'll squint. And if I can still separate the shadows from the light, I'm probably in good shape, literally.